I think we're live. I got the notification. Welcome, everyone. We'll just give some folks a few more minutes to join before we get started. Feel free to drop in the chat where you're listening in from. I am in Canada, and I can never find the Canadian flag. Oh, there it is. And Carl, where are you joining us from today?
I'm based in Minneapolis, Minnesota, so close to Canada.
Love it. Yeah, we're at least on the same side of the world. Awesome. I'd love to see it. And by the way, throughout our conversation today, everyone has access to the chat there. So please drop in your questions for Carl. And then, yeah, as we get chatting, we'll pull them up and start to answer some of them. But yeah, welcome in, everyone. I see a few more folks funneling in. We'll get started in about a minute or so. I also just launched a poll that hopefully everyone can see now. Just curious, what best describes everybody's role? It's helpful to know who we have listening in. Awesome. Looks like a lot of researchers, majority, some research ops folks. Welcome in. Lillian in the chat is saying, will this be recorded? Yes, it will. And then we'll share it out to everyone's email afterwards. Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for joining. Continue to drop in where you're listening in from in the chat as we get started here. My name is Sydney. I'm our Senior Product Marketing Manager on the Rally UXR team. And today I am joined by Carl Pearson. Should I say Dr. Carl Pearson?
Please go.
Sounds so fancy. Who is a staff quantitative researcher at Reddit and has experience at Meta, UserZoom, Red Hat. There's a lot of insane companies that you've worked at, Carl. So yeah, would love to pass it over to you for a quick intro.
Yeah, so currently at Reddit, the only quantitative researcher on the team, so kind of building that function out personally and helping other people up level. Yeah, I'm a mixed methods researcher by training, so I have done qual extensively, but now I focus on quant primarily. And I spend a lot of time just writing about things like quantitative UX research and research impact on my blog. So yeah, that's about it.
Awesome. Thanks, Carl. And yeah, we'll definitely share a link to your blog. And I know you have several really helpful posts on LinkedIn that you share quite often as well. So yeah, we'll definitely drop the link to those in the chat at some point. Well, thank you for being here with us, Carl. We're excited to dive into what it means to practice rigorous, high impact research in a world where methods are merging and roles are shifting. And I think the expectations of researchers, as we all know, are potentially higher than they have ever been. So I know that when we were chatting earlier and sort of like prepping for our chat today, you mentioned that you believe UX research is mixed methods by default. And that's interesting to hear coming from a quant UX researcher. So I'm curious to sort of understand a little bit more of what you meant by that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so like I said, I'm quant by title right now, but I have a mixed methods background. And the more that I have gotten into the field, the more that I start to see that there was a big boom in qualitative hiring around like 2019, 2020. And it really brought that sort of qualitative only research title into play. Before then, that title didn't really exist in the same way that the quant title didn't really exist. But Brian Utesh, who's a UX researcher, wrote a great article on why he only hires mixed methods researchers. And I thought one thing he said was so poignant, and it was that you would never describe yourself as sort of like a generative only researcher or evaluative only researcher, which is also kind of another way to split methodology. So why do that for qual and quant? It's not that you need to be perfect and know absolutely everything, but when you say you're qual only, and I think more rarely, but still sometimes quant only, it's kind of saying I'm not willing to learn this. If people ask me this, like, to do a research question that necessitates this, I might not tackle it in the optimal way. I think it's just a lack of curiosity. And this isn't to throw shade at people that don't know as much quant. There's room to learn it. All you need is the curiosity and drive for it. But I think even when I've talked to people that have been in this field for 30 years, it used to have a totally different name than UX research. It was like, usability engineer, or sometimes information architect. Back then, there was no qual-quant distinction. I think there was more qualitative work going on just because, honestly, operational challenges. It was like pretty hard to get people. It was often in person. They didn't have all these tools that we have to make it really easy now. But I don't think people had this idea, well, I just can't do any quant work. So I think when I say mixed methods by default, I'm kind of alluding to the roots. People used to just be able to take on whatever skill set they needed or learn it on the fly. And I think we're kind of going back to that, especially as hiring is, unfortunately a bit more contracted in the UXR field right now. So I think that's kind of the way it originally was. And we're kind of just swinging back to how it was, when it started. And we might have just kind of gone a little off the path rather than, I don't think this idea that UX research was originally qualitative is totally correct.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for unpacking that, Carl. It's super interesting. I think what I'm hearing, and for everyone listening, is that like, yeah, but obviously mixed methods is important. And I think it's easy to get like overwhelmed by the sense of like, I have to be really specialized in like one particular area in order to be hireable. And what it sounds like you're saying and what I'm hearing is it's actually even more attractive to have sort of like that baseline understanding of different methods that you can lean on. And I love that you said it's never too late to learn and to have that inherent curiosity about, yeah, different methods. So that's super interesting. And I know we have some questions that folks have submitted beforehand about how to start to learn more into specifically quant research. So we'll definitely get to those throughout our conversation. But I'm curious, can you share a little bit about maybe some of the signs that a researcher or a team
Sorry, I just had a little bit of audio cut out on my end. I don't know if that was me. Give me 1 second here.
Okay, is this better?
Yeah, we're gonna switch to the back.
I think it was me. Can you hear me? I can't hear you now. We'll get there. Yeah, our last AMA, I had issues as well. I think I'll just ditch the headphones from now on.
Okay. Can people hear me now?
Yes, we got you.
I'm gonna keep with these headphones on. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Awesome. Cool. And I'll keep mine off.
Yeah.
Cool.
No, I think your question there, I just at the very beginning of it.
Yes. Yeah. So my question is, I'm wondering if you can just, as we're sort of talking about being mixed methods by default, I'm curious if you can share any signs that a researcher or a team is too siloed in one method, and maybe like if there's any risks associated with that.
Yeah, I mean, the best way to do it is kind of audit what methods you're doing. And I don't think there's an easy way to do this because depending on what the product team needs, like where the product life cycle is at, what kind of team you're embedded on. I mean, it's possible you primarily have qualitative questions to answer or quantitative questions. So if you're just say doing 80% qualitative work, that might not be a bad thing. There are definitely cases where the team should be heavily focused on qual work. But it's more about looking high level. When the team asks you questions and you could answer them with qual or quant, are you kind of always defaulting to qual? Or if something necessitates like a mixed methods protocol, like say you need to explore some new segments, but you also need to understand the prevalence of those segments. If you're trying to kind of skimp by on just the qualitative work and you're saying, well, we'll just forego this kind of quantitative extension of this mixed methods work we should do, then I think that's a red flag. So kind of look at what the needs are and what the team is actually doing. And the challenge there is that you have to have somewhat of an understanding of where qualitative work is helpful to make that diagnosis. So I think that's the important, again, of like kind of staffing at least some people with mixed methods capabilities. The threat there is that, it kind of goes back to rigor. If you're trying to answer qualitative questions quantitatively or vice versa, you're probably going to miss the mark in some way. So we're really just trying to best fit the method for the product question at hand.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And I think Yeah, it's interesting when you're saying it's kind of sounding like having the like it's important as researchers to have the confidence to know which method is going to be the best for whichever project you're running. And so I think that's really important. Like I think that's really empowering, is like to be the trusted person to make that decision in order to like uncover the insights that you need.
Yeah.
Um,
And that's kind of the core competency of a UX researcher. Like I don't know if it's core, but it's foundational to know what method to choose and why. So even if you're not a quantitative expert, knowing when quant is kind of the better solution for something can still help you say, maybe we need to pull in this other person. But just having at least some level of fluency across the spectrum, I think is critical for researchers.
Yeah, totally. I'm curious, how do you personally decide like when to blend methods or to lean one way more heavily? And maybe, yeah, if there's any examples that you're able to share.
Yeah, I mean, I wish I had a sort of succinct decision tree for that, and I've seen people try to put them together, but that's kind of the whole job outside of socialization and impact and like sharing. That's kind of the whole thing, and that's what all the training for like rigor of methods and method selection comes into. So it's hard to be super succinct about it. I think one common thing that I see as a quant UXR is when somebody wants a survey but they don't actually have a clear set of hypotheses. So we're kind of like guessing what we would put into, multiple choice response options, or have a lot of open ends. Like all of these signal to me, like we actually don't know enough about this space to quantify it yet. And that goes kind of back to the mixed methods design. And that would be the explanatory design or exploratory design. One of them starts where you essentially need to understand the space that you're in before you quantify it. So I get that a lot where people are like, we want to quantify this. And it's like, we actually don't know what we want to quantify yet. So we have to do some qual to make this survey worth it. Otherwise, we're going to be left with a lot more questions than answers if we run this survey.
Yeah. Yeah. Super interesting. I really like that breakdown of that. Maybe like it's not necessarily one or the other. It's at what point do you lean on whichever method is going to make the most sense for like the stage in the study that you're running.
Yeah, I had a great professor who taught qualitative methods that was not in the coursework I was supposed to take. It was an elective, but I'm so glad I took it because my program was more like quantitatively or kind of evaluatively focused. And one thing that she mentioned is that it's like mixed methods is a little bit of a misnomer because there's very few methods where you're like truly blending qual and quant at the same time. It's mostly like staggered. So it's more like a multi-method is probably a better name for it because you get more value out of each if you do them after one another and kind of build on the learnings from each of them.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. Yeah, switching it to multi-method. That is I feel like a lot more clear. It's awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. So last question on this before we sort of move on. What advice would you give to a team or researchers that are trying to integrate both of those practices more effectively?
Yeah. I mean, I think you have to either hire for that skill set or give people the time to train up on it. And I think that any good team like gives time for personal development of their people, gives them opportunities to learn the basics and then get to employ those basics. So again, I think a more tangible tip beyond just like kind of getting the skills there is thinking it more in like phases of a research program. Like we rarely do one study in isolation. It's more about building on the insights as the team either develops the product or we just develop more understanding entirely within research. So look at kind of the classic but simple ideas behind mixed methods. It's been written about a lot in like academic literature. It's actually very, very accessible, unlike a lot of academic literature. And think about how the work you're doing might kind of ladder into some of those frameworks for mixed method research.
Yeah, super interesting. And I see that we have a quick question in the chat, which is there a book or a course that you can recommend for different quant methods? And I know that, we mentioned that we're going to share your blog, we'll share your LinkedIn, and I know there's a ton of resources in there, but I'm curious, Carl, off the top of your head, if there's anything you can share here.
Yeah, I have a post that's about learning quant UXR, and I break down some different pillars because we often just think of surveys, but there's a lot of elements around that, like statistics, research design, which is not design research, but it's how we effectively create our methods. And then programming, because sometimes it's not a survey or even anything talking to users directly, but we dig into log data, kind of like our friends in data science. So there's a good, I think, breadth of methods that are described in that blog post. Chris Chapman and Carrie Rodden's book, Quantitative User Experience Research, was published just a few years ago and is kind of the most foundational text for quant UXR methods, and gives a ton, everything from CSAT surveys to max diff surveys to log data analysis. So if you want an actual textbook, that's recommended in my blog post, but if you, that's just the name I would probably start with.
Awesome. Love it. Thank you so much. Yeah, and we can track down some of those resources and share them here. Awesome. All right. So I know we kind of touched a little bit on it at the beginning of our conversation about how rigor isn't optional. And I know that you have, talked about rigor like on LinkedIn, on your blog, as essential, especially when it comes to democratized or like self-serve environments. And I'm curious if you can share, what does rigor mean to you?
Yeah, this is kind of a fun one for me because I sat down to write a blog post, and in the first opening paragraph, I was like, okay, so this is what rigor is. And then I went to look for some sources, and then I thought about it, and I was like, oh, no one has actually cared to define this specifically within UX research. So I ended up writing a whole really long blog post that was essentially just supposed to be like a throwaway paragraph, quick intro paragraph for one of my posts. And the blog post is just defining rigor in UX research. You can find it on my website, carljpearson.com. Just a casual little plug there. So rigor is, like, I pulled from a definition in academia, which is a domain called action research. And that's, again, kind of a jargony term that just means research that is applied to like achieve a specific goal. Like, it's not basic research where we're trying to foundationally kind of understand the universe. Like, we're doing it to move the needle on something we care about. And in UX research, this is often like a business, maybe it's like a nonprofit, but it's an organization of some kind. It could even be like the government service arm or something like that. And what it really does is it starts to blend two different philosophical ideas, which is like the qualitative has a different philosophical tradition than quantitative research. So I tried to blend those together and ultimately draw from other people that have kind of done this work before me. And to be as succinct as possible, and it's still kind of wordy, rigor is essentially designing our research so that we understand the environment, whatever that it means in the context, well enough that it helps us achieve our goals. So we want to understand not reality for its own sake, but we have a goal and we want to understand reality well enough that the actions we take will help move us towards that goal. So a concept like rigor is a little bit abstract, but I think as far as definitions go, that one's a little bit more down to earth and a little bit more tangible.
Yeah, I really like that. Like that definition. I agree. It is kind of abstract, but I think what you said about designing research so that we can like understand the environment enough to take an action, I think that's really interesting. Like drawing that connection to being able to actually do something with the research that we're doing and something meaningful. So I think that's everything. Like, that's the whole purpose. So I'm curious, how do we apply that? Like, what does rigor mean day to day? And I'm curious if you have any examples of that.
Yeah, like we were talking about before, a lot of it is sort of like method selection, choosing the right tool for the job. And the other piece of it is there's so many factors that go into it, and it's really variable across, whatever kind of methodology you're using. And I wrote a follow-up post about this, and I'm calling it minimum viable rigor. So it's like, we're not trying to be academic. We're not trying to, be as maximally rigorous as possible. We would do that, but we live in a resource-constrained world, and we work in resource-constrained environments. So whether that's time, money, skills, whatever it is, it kind of whittles down what we're able to do. So it's a matter of thinking through every point that matters. So you have to know when you're making a decision, is this going to affect the rigor? Like, one really obvious one is like sampling. Like, are you sampling from a panel or users that you have like their direct access to because they already use your product. That's going to have a big impact on the way that you maybe structure your questions in an interview or survey, and the kind of things you look out for. Like in a panel, for example, you're a lot more likely to get like an acquiescence bias on a survey. So people that are just kind of saying, yeah, I really love this. This is like a 5 out of 5. Where someone that's your actual customer that's probably paying you money is much more likely to give you an honest response. And there's still bias there. They might be more likely to give you like a very negative response because they've interacted with your product and maybe they have a bone to pick. So there's all these little things. And the key is to just know what decision you're making will have an impact on your rigor. And then, given your resources, make the decision you think is best and just make a note of it. So if anyone asks you, hey, why is this the way it is? You can say, yeah, I already thought about that. Here's why we're doing it this way. And that's pretty much the job of choosing the right method and doing research the right way. And, it's easy to say that in a couple sentences, but it's a lot harder to do in practice.
Yeah, totally. And I think the, repetition of, like you were saying, sort of have that written down somewhere that if anyone questions you, you can be like, yep, I've already thought about it. Here's why I made this decision. I think over time that sort of helps to build the reputation of research within the company, like internally and externally. And it's like, okay, people start to understand, especially, like leadership or stakeholders start to understand how decisions get made and why. And that really like the best interests of the business were taken into account and start to like build that trust with research teams. So I think it really does have that like full circle moment. And I really I'm also dropping your blog post in the chat because I really like the term minimum viable rigor. It's so realistic because, like you said, teams are like resource constrained. Yeah, like even people, teams of one who are like, fighting an uphill battle with making these decisions. So I think, that blog post definitely would recommend everyone to check out your blog. I think that's really helpful for folks in the position that we're in.
Yeah, for sure. And I think there's a lot of tension right now on saying, UX research is like too rigorous and maybe not rigorous enough. And I'm trying to meet it somewhere in the middle and kind of ground it in that reality. And yeah, like you said, I think it builds up the trust in an organization to know things are being done correctly. I think rigorous research also makes your findings more valuable. Like, for example, if you ask somebody like, hey, do you like this product? Like, that's kind of a bad question. It doesn't really give you useful answers. So not only is it not rigorous, like your findings won't really be deep. They won't really tell the product team anything new. So I think the piece that is left out about this rigor conversation is that rigorous insights, the way that they're designed, will actually give you like novel information that helps the team think about things in a new way and makes actual progress instead of just kind of being a simple validation that didn't need to be there in the first place. But my last thought here too is that decision making, whether it's reproducibility and like quant work or traceability as it's called, I think, in qualitative work, I think there's a temptation for researchers to be like, look at all the work I did. I made all these decisions. The reality is that like product managers and like they often don't give a shit. So you like really should put it in the appendix. And then if they ask, you're like, bam, I have it. But don't lead with that. Lead with it with your like coworkers that want to nerd out about the methods. But it's important. You need to have it in the deck, but it should probably be in the appendix. So I don't think it makes it less important to you as a researcher, but you got to think about your audience when you're sharing out your work.
Yeah, absolutely. And sort of like speaking their language. I'm curious so for those teams who maybe have like PMs or designers and researchers that are, more of a democratized environment, I guess I would say, what would be your advice for how teams can maintain high standards within their research, given, what sort of like the restraints that we've talked about, like small teams, small budgets, those types of things.
Yeah, I think this is a really hard one because, when teams want to move faster, they want more to get done. When it's engineering that needs to get done, like they don't say, hey, you're not really good at this, but like just try your best and we'll see how it goes. So like, I think with research, you do have to have people that want to invest the time in it. I think someone posted an article and I can't remember their name. I'll see if I can track it down after this. But they were saying one of the biggest threats to democratize research is if people don't actually want to learn research. And that it's like you do have to actually learn it. And to learn it, you often have to have a drive to do that. One of my first professors in grad school, she was like, anyone can learn to do what we do. In, I mean, it was a human factors graduate program, but essentially in UX research, anyone can learn to do what we do. And I was very threatened by that at the time. I'm like, why am I getting this degree? Like, why does this matter? But it's like, you actually have to then learn it. You have to take the time and you have to invest in it. So I think the tip here is maybe like finding people that actually do want to learn it, because it's really hard to make somebody learn something they're not actually invested in. So if you have any gatekeeping ability and can kind of give that power to like conduct research using your tools to people, try to identify people that are really passionate about it, because it will take some effort. And it's certainly doable. Like anyone can learn to do what we do, but you have to take the time to actually do it. So you can't really skip that step and expect to get results that lead to a good impact for the business.
Yeah, absolutely. I really like that framing of it, because yeah, I agreed. It can be like scary, and I think probably everybody here has felt that, I don't want to say threat, but it's a little bit concerning if people like PMs are all of a sudden can come in and start research. So I really like that call out of if anyone, folks who are willing to invest the time and to learn a new skill. And I think that goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning of the conversation too, of researchers, maybe they lean more qual or more quant, whatever it might be, having that curiosity to lean into whatever it is, different methods or tools or tactics or anything like that, to continue to like hone the skill.
Yeah, totally. I mean, there's that kind of like subset of this question, which is like, who has the power to do what methods, even within a research team? So that totally crossed my mind too, is like, there's a connection there. Quant stuff is really interesting, but like, yeah, you got to take the time to learn it if you want to do it and get a good outcome from it.
Yeah, totally. Makes sense. Awesome. And I know, yeah, sort of like our title today is your research practice built on rigor or running on luck. I would love to talk about the luck side of things. So yeah, you've said in the past that in order to get good research, that teams need to reduce their reliance on luck. Are you able to share maybe just unpack that idea for us? Let's start there.
Yeah, I think when I was talking about this, it kind of goes back to an old idea of like UX theater or like research theater, which is essentially like doing it because it's the right thing to do, but not actually thinking about the kind of value that we get from it. So doing it for its face value. And if you do research that is sort of below that minimum viable rigor line, what that starts to do is it takes your insights and they no longer kind of relate to that reality that we want to understand to make our decisions. And if you get too far from that reality, you're then making decisions that you don't have a clear view of what's going on. And the reason that matters is because the most important kind of impact to a business is essentially like their final metrics, whether that's like user growth or revenue or retention or, decreased customer support tickets, whatever that might be. Like that's the thing that they care about. So if you're doing research that is not rigorous enough, you're essentially just relying on luck because you don't have any bearing to reality in that. And I think it's actually a little bit worse than relying on luck if you do unrigorous research, because at least with luck, you're like, well, we don't know, but we're just going to send it and see what happens. But then you're kind of waiting and you're a little more cautious about checking the results. But if you do work that is sort of like falsely confident, then you're going to be less likely to interrogate when things aren't lining up down the road. So it's like luck, but worse because you're not as wary of kind of what is happening in front of your eyes as you go into it.
Yeah, interesting. It kind of sounds like rigor and luck have like, oh, there's a term for it that I'm blanking on, but sort of that relationship where like the more luck you're relying on, the less rigor your study will have, or sort of like your process.
Yeah, I think like it's been framed often in terms of like risk. Like the more risk you have, the more you're relying on luck for success. So if you have luck, that means that there was a lot of risk and you were still successful anyway, which works sometimes, but probably not enough over the long term.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I dropped this poll So I'm going to pull it up here. So the poll is, what's the hardest part of maintaining rigor in your org? I think this is sort of like, yeah, relevant to what we're chatting about right now. I'm curious, Carl, if these responses, do they surprise you? Is there anything that you think is missing here that you've experienced?
I think time pressure is, I mean, it seems like one of the biggest resources these days. So I think that makes sense. And I think it actually loops in very clearly with the next one, which is a lack of clear standards. And this is where the team coming together can really help, because I think one way to deal with time pressure is to find a way, obviously, to move more efficiently through a rigorous approach. And if you can understand your context that you're working in and the way that you do studies, you can essentially pre-make some of those decisions that we were talking about. Like, is this decision going to affect the rigor? If you're doing research in similar ways, like, you can make those ahead of time, so you have to think about them less and less. So working, and also if you are someone who maybe doesn't know as much about X method and your coworker does, it takes a lot of time to go track them down, ask them, kind of consolidate their information and make that decision. So if you can draw on everyone's collective experience to get kind of the best practices for your org across all of the methods, then you cut down on all of that communication time and you can kind of do that all at once. So time pressure is definitely real, but I think the more you document those decisions and learn from people around you, the more you can speed things up while maintaining that level of rigor.
Yeah, totally. Thank you for that. I think those are really actually like actionable that everyone can kind of take away with and start to apply. I'm also really, actually, let me pull this up one more time. I think it's interesting too that democratization is the lowest one. Like, I don't know why I kind of expected that with folks hopping in who maybe don't have as much experience with research, that would be challenging to maintain rigor, if you have PMs or designers that are jumping in. But I think it's really interesting to see that that's not the hardest part. So yeah, Carl, I'm curious if you have any thoughts on that too.
Yeah, I mean, part of me thinks that is low, just considering how strong it is in the zeitgeist. But then I think about teams that I've worked on, and like, there isn't actually that much democratization going on. And even if like X number of teams democratize, there's like a small amount of actual volume of research that is going through that democratized process. Like, I think a 10% amount of research going through democratization is like probably a good amount for a team to shoot for. So that's my like naive guesses about it, but it is interesting to see that for sure. I guess I thought it might be higher, but I really don't know where that would end up. So interesting to see the numbers.
Yeah, definitely. And fair enough. And I mean, yeah, I'm sure you'd have a lot to say about sample sizes here of people answering these polls. So, but anyways, perfect. Well, yeah, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts there. I'm curious, as we're sort of talking about, yes, rigor and risk throughout the entire sort of like research process, how would you define impact in research? And I know this looks different for different people. And yeah, what does it look like when research actually has a very high impact?
Yeah. So I wrote a post about this too that has sort of a framework I put together. And I looked at, I think it was like 12 or more existing like frameworks people have put together and tried to like consolidate them amongst themes. The interesting thing that I think maybe lends credibility to mine and also shows that it's not really mine at all is that right as I kind of consolidated my framework, someone that I had cited updated their framework and it looked almost identical to mine. When I posted mine, I had other researchers that I really respect saying, yeah, I have a different label for these three things, but I actually have the exact same three things as you. So the way that I break down impact is first you have the execution of research itself. So like numbers of studies you're running, number of reach out for like requests that you're getting, kind of number of insights generated, things like that. Then you have the influence, which is like as you kind of hand over your power as a researcher to try and like get someone else to take action. So that can be, how you influence the strategy and you have a citation in a strategy document, or, a line on a redesign or something like that, where you can say like people are being influenced by the work that I'm doing. And then the last outcome is whatever the actual business cares about. So again, back to like, revenue growth, user retention, whatever that might be. And all of these are like essential steps. But it's interesting because when we're talking all about rigor, that has the biggest impact on like the execution of research itself. And then democratization also has a big impact there because people want to generate more insights. They want more. So you kind of increase that as well. But the only one that like the business cares about, like the CEO cares about, or like your VPs, is the organizational outcome. Like they don't care how many insights you've generated. They don't even really care that much about how many people you've influenced, even though that's really important for us. They only care about how the business is doing better or not. And I think influence is really important for us as researchers because it's kind of the last like step in this process that we own. Like we don't own the KPI that a PM owns. Like they own that, and they're the one that's going to take the heat if they don't get the numbers up, like not research directly. But if we do insights and no one listens to them, like we will get heat for that. That's the last thing that a research owns in this line of steps. So I think as researchers, execution is important because you have to do the work itself. It needs to be rigorous ultimately because you want the final numbers to go up on the other side. Influence is important because that's kind of how we track the success of our work itself. And if our work is rigorous and high quality, then the business numbers will go up in the end. So there's kind of a lot to unpack there. But that's kind of my framework for thinking about impact and like the different kinds of impact that exist in a company.
Yeah, absolutely. I like that distinction of like the execution metrics or even like research operations metrics versus the business metrics and impact. And I'm curious, what are some of the ways that you think to like think about those business metrics in a meaningful way so that, a researcher day to day can say, okay, this work that I'm doing is actually impacting the business?
Yeah, this is where I don't know if there's a lot of consensus here. I see a lot of people kind of talk about these metrics in aggregate, like I did X number of studies or like X number of things influenced, but it's like that's a very kind of vertical slice of just like whatever kind of step you're looking at. But it really matters more about how one generation of an insight connects to influence, connects to the business outcomes. So it's really more like horizontal kind of through time for individual projects. Like that is where the real value comes from. And I think that the use of metrics for research impact is also not how impact tends to be used, especially by ICs. And like I'm an IC, I've never been a manager. And I really like being an IC for a lot of reasons. But the way that we use impact is like a narrative to say, like you're saying, like what impact did I have on the business? Like that is something that is hard to quantify. You can have like individual data points, but it's more about like the narrative. So, I keep a spreadsheet that has every project I've done, and then it has kind of like a rolling set of like impacts that I track. And they kind of progress linearly. So it starts out like, oh, this person put this in this doc. This person referenced this doc in this strategy doc. The team built this and it was based originally on this findings that were in the strategy doc. And then, that might be Q2. And then Q3, it's like, oh, this thing that we launched like had, positive user growth metrics. So that is not going to be quantified by me saying I did X number of studies, but it's going to say like I did this one thing that led to this, that led to this, that led to this. And, candidly, I think that takes you away from the work that the company cares about the most, which is like creating useful insights and influencing people. That's like what you're hired to do. But everyone kind of has to defend like the value of their work. So you need to make time for it. And it's worth spending a little bit of time and having a tracker to just see, how all this stuff is evolving over time. And personally, I kind of love that stuff too. I think it's like interesting. Like I don't want to be mired in it, but I do like to see the value of my work, and it's cool when something ships and it's useful to people. So that's kind of how I think about creating a narrative for impact for projects as a researcher.
Yeah, that's super interesting. It's like storytelling essentially. And
Totally.
I love how you mentioned that you have a spreadsheet of some of those examples. I think it's really like that's a really interesting takeaway as well. It's almost like creating a story bank of, here's a project I worked on. I talked to, this group of people or whatever, whatever the study might be. And this is the impact that it had. And yeah, I want to pull up another poll because it's super interesting that the first sort of like the winning option is product decisions influenced. And I think that's exactly what we're talking about is like, what are those day-to-day changes that, have been collected from user feedback that have influenced the product? And how did I, as a UX researcher, contribute to that? For the overall success of the business.
Absolutely. Like I was saying, like the influence that a researcher has is kind of what we are on the hook for as a function. Like that is what we are graded on, essentially, is that kind of influence we have. We like to see the business outcomes go up, but that is not something we are graded on. Someone else owns those metrics. So you have to look at ownership across the organization. Of course, they're all like related to each other, but that influence is really important. And I think this is telling to see it in the data here that, this is the number one signal. And it's also a challenge too, because you don't always have a business outcome or metric that you can look at. Like some of my most important work has been like, this is a terrible idea. Let's not do this. How do you look at the metrics for that? Like you didn't ship it. It's still good that you did it. I trust it because I know that I employed enough rigor that it was like we were matching the reality of the situation. But in some of the most important UXR work, like there is no metric to look at. So that you're lucky to get the final business metric because it doesn't even apply to every situation.
Yeah, fair enough. I'm just imagining your spreadsheet being like, we didn't end up shipping that. But that can say like, and I think like another piece of that storytelling is like, just as an example, what money did you save the company? What time did you save like engineers from developing that feature? Like, I think it all, ties into product decisions that get influenced, whether you ship something or not.
Yeah, totally. And there's, people that have developed calculations. Like my colleague from grad school, Thomas Stokes, has like a calculator for ROI, and you can kind of plug those numbers in. But, it still involves a lot of qualitative judgment. You're still kind of estimating engineering hours saved and stuff. So where I think researchers are maybe a little nervous to kind of make leaps and guesses when it comes to this impact stuff, you kind of have to draw the lines yourself because you can never 100% like kind of prove causality in such a complicated world.
Yeah, totally. Super interesting. I'm also interested to hear from your perspective. So how would you sort of take that one step further? And I'm curious if you have any ideas on how to effectively communicate research impact to non-research stakeholders or leadership.
Yeah, I think a lot of times they are looking for more of like the numbers. Like people outside of like research especially are not familiar with more like a qualitative assessment, so they're looking for those like hard numbers from like we call like a positivist like philosophical tradition, like classic science thinking. Even that's just predominant in the business world. So when you can show numbers, it can be useful. Things like usability, benchmarking when it makes sense, or like sentiment tracking, all of these things can help lend credibility, but it can be a little tough because sometimes then you're spending a lot of effort just to like prove that the work you do is valuable. Like you're doing extra projects to say your other projects are good, so you got to kind of walk a fine line there. I will say for like ICs, a lot of times you are not defending this to people that are non-research stakeholders. Your most important stakeholder in a corporation is probably your manager. At smaller companies where like you're thinking less about your management chain and more just about like, at a startup, like things are on fire, you might be answering to the CEO more. So that's where some of those numbers might come more into play, or taking time to slow down and kind of just demonstrate qualitative wins. But you have to hope that your stakeholders are either willing to listen to like your explanation of the value of like a qualitative win, or they already know it if you're super lucky.
Yeah, love it. And yeah, I think it also comes down to like, I think also what we were talking about earlier about, speaking the language of the folks that you're sharing insights with. It's like, how can you figure out those stories to tell or the narrative to share that folks who might not have a research background can also understand and sort of like speaking their language.
Yeah, and sometimes you just have to make the case and slow down. Like there's a lot of metaphors, and sometimes they're used in ways I don't agree with. But like you only need to run over a pothole once to know you need to fix it. Like there are some kind of like not like a trick of persuasion, but they're just, ways to speak that you can draw on that can help illustrate that in like tangible ways that don't get too philosophical. Because most people don't want to hear about positivism and interpretivism. I don't blame them because there's a lot to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Interesting. Awesome. All right. Well, I know that we have about 15 minutes left in our chat. So please, everybody, if you have questions for Carl, drop them in. We also had several questions submitted before our chat. So I'm going to pull up some of those. But maybe let me start with this one because it's kind of related to what we've been talking about. I guess going back a little bit, how do you ensure quality with research democratization? And sorry to throw this one at you. I know it's a big question.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to, like I said, identify the right people to like bring in a democratization, people that are willing to learn, and you have to go into it kind of letting folks do research when you think their skills are up to par, and then building in checks like quality checks. Like, don't let it be a total free for all, but have kind of some kind of quality review as things go out that you can check on. I do that with my team right now, and we're all I think very talented researchers. We still check each other's work and find stuff. So I think that is not just unique to democratization, but that collaboration in the development process can be really valuable. And then if you have like designers doing democratized research, they're really open to like crits because they do these design crits all the time. Like, that's not as embedded in UXR culture. So see if you can do like a research crit where you might review one of their interviews or something like that. When you have like a good rapport, you don't just want to like lay this on if they're not ready for it, but oftentimes they are. So like review and say, you did this well. This is the way I might do this for XYZ reasons. So like continue to help people improve. But this is the challenge. You do democratization because time is tight, but it ends up taking a lot of time too. So you really got to find that balance there.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that you mentioned the collaboration piece. And I also think, this design crit research crit idea is great. I think also because not only does it help to sort of maintain the quality, but it's also relating back to what we were talking about earlier, is that if you have designers that are open to that feedback and to learning, it's only going to make them a stronger researcher and even continue to build on that reputation that they have with the research team. And I think it just kind of helps to level everybody up. So that's a really great idea.
Yeah, exactly.
Love it. Awesome. All right, let me pull up another question here. So Carl, what are the biggest changes or shifts in how you work in the last 6 months with all the new AI tools and features?
Yeah, I can't really talk about research right now without talking about AI. I think, there was just an interview with Chris Chapman, I think via like Key Lime Interactive. They did an interview with him, and he, if you can look up that article, he summed up my thoughts very well, which is essentially like AI is a very big deal. It like can make some really big changes, but it's not as big of a deal as everyone says it is. I think there's a lot of economic pressures that are really putting it in the spotlight. There are some things that AI does really well. Like it's good at certain kinds of summarization. It's getting really good at translation. That's really, really nice. It can translate things like quite effectively. It can be really useful as like a sparring partner for things that you already know somewhat well. Like, I like to ask it about statistics, and it's not always right, but sometimes it gets me like thinking in new ways. So I'm not just like letting it choose my whole model for me, but I'll say, I'm thinking about this rather than this, and we'll kind of spar back and forth. So kind of a sparring partner, some of those summarization pieces. But there's a lot that, is not quite there. I think there's early work coming out now about like summarization of open text responses, and that can still be a challenge to know if it's getting the themes right. You have to double check for hallucinations and stuff like that too. So some stuff is there, some stuff is not. I just have to say, like, the biggest shift that is not happening with AI is like AI is not helping me choose better research projects. And that's like one of the most important things a good researcher does, is choosing what to research. That is, I think, sometimes overlooked, and something AI is like pretty bad at still. And I haven't gone into it earnestly to have it do that for me, but I've been curious, and it hasn't wowed.
Yeah, and definitely, I mean, I'm not surprised to hear that. I think one of the beliefs that we have at Rally is that humans are the center of research, and there's no way that AI can replace humans. It's more just like, that supporting function, like what you're saying, translating and sort of those more administrative tasks to help free up time for researchers to do work that they love to do. And yeah, like you said, we need that human to understand the context and the nuance, and just can't be relying solely on AI for that.
Yep, totally.
Interesting. Yeah, and I don't want to go down an AI rabbit hole. I know there's so much we could talk about here, but there's another question from that was submitted in advance, which is, I'm curious. Actually, wait, before we get to this question, Carl, can you tell us a little bit more about the PhD that you did, and maybe like how it's been helpful in your career?
Yeah, so I did a human factors PhD, which is like a psychology subdiscipline, and it. I did a master's along the way to the PhD. I studied trust and automated tools, which are a little different than like AI because they're not generative tools. So it's a little bit different, but has a lot of applications now. So I loved my human factors program, and I'll sing its praises. One, because like PhDs in academia are kind of littered with negativity and like toxicity, and my program was not that way. Like I still keep up with many of my colleagues and have great respect for them. My professors were super supportive. Like it was great. So if you're gonna do grad school, like take time to interview for the vibes. Like the vibes are important. You're gonna spend a lot of time there. The other thing was that it wasn't like a transition for me from academia to industry. Like I studied usability testing in grad school. So it wasn't like I had to kind of like shoehorn some broader ideas about like human behavioral research into what I do now. So I studied exactly what I do now. And it's, of course, different in an industry context, but I feel really lucky to just have a super deep understanding of like the core constructs we look at and like the toolkits that we have at our disposal. So it was like very direct training for the UX research program. So I really, really valued just, having my school projects. Like I got to do a school project with like Epic Games, like redesigning a heads up display for one of their video games, like my first semester. Like that's super cool, super applied. So I think that was the big win for me. And then, Jack, going deep in methods, qual and quant, just really, really diving in there.
Yeah, love it. Yeah, that sounds like a super interesting program. I love the like real world experience, like you mentioned, working with Epic. That's epic. But I also love that you called out like to interview for the vibes. I think that's really important, and obviously you want to make sure that you're gonna like enjoy any sort of additional education that you do. So yeah, that's a super great call out. So this question here that we have is, in your opinion, do you need a PhD to move into quantitative research, or is a master's degree enough, or are some courses enough? Yeah, I'm curious in your opinion here.
Yeah, I mean, you can unpack this in a couple different ways because, like, there is the reality of the hiring landscape. And I think a PhD with the right experience attached to it, or internships, or like focus during your program can be a big leg up, especially if you're looking at like FANG type companies. Like, they just have sort of a bias towards hiring that. That said, I've worked with people that have master's degrees and the training from that program and their experience in the field, and they're super, super qualified, and I have great respect for their research decision making and their ability to do the work. So there's a little bit of a calculation of just like optics, but as far as like core skills, like certainly you do not need a PhD. It sometimes gives you a little bit more time to like steep in the complicated methods of quant, and that can be beneficial, but again, not a necessity. It all depends on like how you learn, how quickly, and what ways you get to it.
Amazing. And yeah, like we sort of mentioned at the beginning of this chat too, we can share additional resources to start to, yeah, look into what is available for like additional education and courses and training. And yeah. Amazing. All right. So I know we only have 5 minutes left. I want to quickly get to this question because I think this is super interesting. Carl, is there anything you can share about what research looks like at Reddit? I think this is, yeah, everyone's curious.
Yeah. Without, veering too much into it, I'll just say as a quant, I really like it because we have like so many users. And one of the challenges of working in like a B2B space was just like I wanted to do quant, but I couldn't because it was very hard to get to people. Or if I did, it was like working with more small sample sizes, which has sort of a different set of challenges. And I'm really enjoying the kind of challenges and ways of doing studies with really large sample sizes. It's just like it's a very lucky place to be for a researcher. Yeah, we're kind of a smaller team, but mighty, I would say. So all the researchers cover a lot of ground, but do a lot of excellent work at Reddit. And personally, I use Reddit, and it's fun to work on something that I use a lot in my own time. So that's maybe one of the biggest benefits there.
Yeah, that's amazing and super interesting. I think it's really awesome that you can be a regular user of the product that you're doing research on. It's amazing.
Yeah, it's fun. I am actually going to do a talk at Quant UX Con in November, and I'm going to dive deeper into the specific methods and projects that I did early on as like the first Quant UXR. So if you want more of a taste and it's more like approved by comms, I'll be going into more detail then.
Love it. Oh, that's super exciting. Awesome. All right. Let's do this question from Jared. Do you think the job market now or in the future supports the need for having purely research-focused staff, or will we be pushed to more of a generalist role?
Yeah, I've seen this question floating around on LinkedIn. I think it's on everyone's mind for good reason. I've been in this field for like 7 or 8 years now, and it's mostly been a boom time until, maybe a couple of years ago, it really started to shift. The more that I talk to people that have been in this field for years and years and years, is it's absolutely cyclical. So there might be more of a push for generalist roles as budgets are tighter right now. If the past 30, 40 years are any indication of the future, that pendulum will swing back, and then it will swing back again. So I think that if that happens, it will be temporary and it will kind of always come back to having room for more specialization. That said, even as we've had this hiring downturn, I still see teams hiring for like research ops and stuff like that, which like that is super niche to have an ops just for research. And I take it for granted because we have it. And, it's amazing to have a well-staffed research ops team. So even though there is this concern for more generalist roles, like I still see people hiring for really, really specific roles. So like I'm not totally clocking that in the job market right now. And there's more quant UXR roles than ever. So I still see some room for specialization just based on my anecdotal experience.
Yeah, that's definitely reassuring to hear. I will also plug our Rally newsletter that we send out monthly. We always have a section in there for any open roles in research and research ops. So I can drop the link for that. But yes, thank you, Carl, for answering that question. We are just almost out of time. So I'm going to ask you our final question for the day, which is, what is one mindset shift that you think every researcher should make to stay relevant and impactful in the next 5 or so years?
I mean, I don't know if everyone needs this shift, but again, I think it's sort of that curiosity, and it goes back to that mixed methods idea. Like I'm a quant researcher. A lot of the quant that I use in my projects day to day, I didn't learn until after grad school. I didn't learn until like 3 years ago. So like always be learning. You never know what you're going to need to use to answer the questions you have. We don't control the questions that get asked of us a lot of the time. So you got to be ready to just roll with it, and you want to find the best way to answer it. So, it's hard when we all have to be heads down, when we have jobs, we're super, super busy as the market is tight. But as you can, keep that curiosity. And it's not all about AI. There's so many things to be curious about too. So yeah, just keep learning. I think that's that keeps you strong as a researcher and keeps your skills like up to date.
Yeah, that's so amazing. I think that's even applicable across several, like every single role is just the ability to keep learning. Totally. But I think what's unique about research is that researchers are just, I think it's just natural, like that curiosity to want to learn more and to know more. And I think that's why a lot of researchers end up in, UX research is because of that. So I think, yeah, everybody here sort of has like a leg up in that sort of curiosity just comes naturally, which I think is awesome.
Yep, definitely.
Love it. Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Carl, for joining us today. That was super insightful. Lots of great takeaways. This call is recorded, so everyone will get a copy of it to your inbox. But other than that, enjoy the rest of your days. And thank you so much, everyone, for joining.
Thanks, everybody.